Hey everyone, welcome to Wealth Redefined. I'm your host, Michael Reynolds, independent financial advisor and owner of Elevation Financial. Thanks for joining me as always. We're going to talk about being a socially conscious consumer today. I love topics that come from real conversations I see out in the world or the interwebs. So I'm in a couple of Facebook groups that focus on socially conscious finance. And this was a question. This was a great question that someone asked in one of these groups. And it prompted some thought at my end on how to have a conversation about this topic. And specifically, the topic is how to be a socially conscious consumer while feeling overwhelmed about it. I'm paraphrasing it, but the question really was asking, hey, I'm doing all these things. I'm trying to make an impact in the world. I care about the environment. I care about social issues. I care about lifting up marginalized communities. I'm doing all these things, but I feel like it's never enough. I feel like I'm very overwhelmed. I feel like there's just always more I could be doing. And there's this sense of paralysis from always feeling like you're not doing enough. And that was really the crux of the question from the person posting. And it was a really good point to bring up, especially among all the people I work with, which is typically, a lot of people interested in focusing on making a positive impact in the environment or in social communities. So the crux again of this conversation is how to be a socially conscious consumer while feeling overwhelmed about it. I want to start by kind of my thought process on what it means to be a socially conscious consumer. So, as consumers, we buy things, we participate in the economy, and what does it mean to be socially conscious? So, in my mind, it means to be aware and to take action toward things that make an impact in the world in terms of environmental impact, equality, inclusion, supporting marginalized communities, anti-racism. So, for example, reduce, reuse, and recycle. That's kind of one of the basic 3 R's we've been taught. Um, as a socially conscious consumer, in my mind, you are attempting to do your best to keep your environmental footprint low. You are recycling when you can. You are making good use of materials and products and avoiding producing waste in the environment. So that's something you would be paying attention to most likely. Also, I think it includes supporting marginalized communities, supporting businesses owned by non-white people, by in the LGBTQ community, by women, lifting up and supporting and finding ways to support marginalized communities, supporting your local communities, local businesses, local food supplies, farmers markets, local shops, local businesses, supporting your local community, providing assistance to those in need, either through donations, through volunteering, through time, finding ways to provide support and resources to those who need it most. So those are some examples of things that, in my mind, go into being a socially conscious consumer, socially conscious person in general. But as a consumer, we're kind of focusing on the consumption aspect and the economic participation aspect of it a little bit more here. So, with all that's going on in the world, I think it is easy to feel overwhelmed. Honestly, there's so much happening in the world. There's so much injustice. There's racism. There is oppression against marginalized communities. There is a very negative trend in the environment that we're noticing. We've got climate change. There's a lot happening in the world that is pretty negative and pretty concerning. And it's easy to feel overwhelmed as one person when you're looking at, hey, what can I do? How can I make an impact? How can I make the world a better place? How can I lift people out of poverty? How can I promote social justice and equality? And how can I do my part to protect and preserve the environment and the earth that we live in? So a lot's going on, a lot of reason to feel overwhelmed. That being said, there is something I learned this term recently as part of the thread in this conversation in this group, the term moral perfectionism. And I did some research into moral perfectionism. And perfectionism in general, I think we know what that is. It's the desire or the impulse to be perfect at whatever it is we're focused on or doing. So moral perfectionism is more of the endless pursuit of the perfect life in the context of impact on the planet and society. So it's this feeling that you're never doing enough. There's always a way to be more perfect, so to speak, at making a positive impact in the world. So it's this desire to have a 100% positive impact in the world, desire to not have any kind of negative footprint. And there's some problems with moral perfectionism based on just my experience, my research, kind of the idea around dealing with moral perfectionism. For one thing, it can greatly diminish our self-esteem. It can greatly diminish our enjoyment of life and sense of peace, and it can lead to incredible amounts of stress along with fear of judgment or worries of inadequacy. So these feelings, while valid and natural for many of us, are not always particularly productive. So if we're trying to truly make an impact and take action, these feelings of low self-esteem or low enjoyment of life or low sense of peace or lots of stress, these can sometimes be counterproductive in our actions toward making an impact. So moral perfectionism can really exacerbate these feelings. People who are perfectionists in general put pressure to meet unattainable standards on themselves, and they often are highly critical of themselves. They beat themselves up over anything that doesn't meet their standards. Again, going along with these negative feelings that can have a negative impact on our ability to be productive in the world sometimes. Sometimes perfectionists and moral perfectionists in particular fear failing so much that they're so terrified they procrastinate because they would rather not do anything at all than do something if it's not done perfectly. So this can lead to feelings of procrastination. It can also harm other people when we buy into this myth of moral perfectionism because it sets unrealistic expectations for those around us, which can be harmful to all parties involved. So there are some real problems with this concept and this mindset of moral perfectionism. So I think it's important that we are aware of this. We notice this. We kind of are vigilant about this tendency in ourselves, or at least some of us, to try to achieve this moral perfectionism state of mind. So what do we do if we're kind of in this situation, if we're feeling stuck, we want to make an impact, we feel there's a lot of injustice in the world, a lot of negative environmental impact, a lot of just negative things happening in the world, and we want to make an impact, we want to improve conditions for those around us and in our world, we want to make a positive impact, but we feel overwhelmed. So one thing I personally like to do is when I'm looking to reconcile this imperfect impact with the desire to do more, is to celebrate what I'm already doing. So I think it's useful to celebrate what you're already doing right now. So if you are someone who cares about these things, if you're someone who cares about making the world a better place through various means and fighting injustices and fighting the negative impacts that are out there, you're probably already recycling. You're probably already shopping local. You're probably already making donations. Um, you're probably already doing things that are actually making real change and making a real impact. So I think it's important to stop and reset first and say, what am I already doing? Maybe make a list, maybe get a piece of paper out and saying, what am I doing that has a positive footprint in the world in these areas I care about? You might be surprised at how long that list actually is. So I would say first reset by identifying and noticing and acknowledging what you're already doing. Next, I like to make a list of values that are important. So make a list of the values that are important to you. Is your number one concern climate change? Is your number one concern racism and focus on being anti-racist? Is your number one concern other marginalized communities? Is your number one concern other areas of social injustice? What is it that's really important to you and why? I think it's important to make a list of those things and identify those values that are hyper important to you, because that gives you a target, so to speak, or an element of focus. I also think it's important to determine your strengths. So, what are your strengths that you can work with? What are these tools you have in your toolbox? Do you have money? Do you have time? Do you have specific skills? Do you have a strong network? Do you have strong partnerships with organizations? What tools do you have that can help you identify where your efforts can be most impactful? Some of us have money that is available for contributing and donating and supporting organizations doing great work. That's one thing you could identify. Others maybe don't have the money but have the time. Do you have the time for things like volunteer efforts, for taking an active role in doing things that move forward social and environmental causes? Do you have specific skills that can apply to making a change? Are you really good at a specific trade? Can you build houses? Can you provide service to people who don't have the money to resolve certain issues in their lives? Like, can you use your skills toward certain acts of service toward your community? Do you have a strong network? Can you rally people to activism? Can you utilize your network and tap into your network to effect change as a larger body or a larger group? Do you have partnerships with these organizations that you can go deeper into, maybe serving on boards or providing feedback or advice or mentorship? Lots of ways you can identify where your strengths are. And I think if you identify your strengths, that will give you more focus toward where you can make the biggest impact. I also think it's important to build routines and habits and then layer on those routines and habits little by little. So one example, start recurring donations, add more on a regular basis. This is something I personally do. So every single year when I'm kind of evaluating the past year and taking stock of what I accomplished this past year and what's coming up for the next year, one thing I'm committed to is adding another layer of recurring donations. I have recurring donations in progress right now for certain organizations. One I donate to is Anti-Racism Daily. Another organization is As You Sow, which focuses on uh, impact investing and advocating for corporate change for the positive. So those are a couple organizations I have recurring monthly donations going to indefinitely. And then next year, as the year rolls around, I will be adding another one. I will be researching and finding out, okay, what organizations do I support that are making an impact in the world? And I'm going to start putting more money toward those organizations and layering a little by little. And eventually, there'll be a significant amount of money going toward organizations on a regular basis that I support that align with my values. So, just like automating your finances can be really useful, automating your impact can be useful as well. Automating donations that really sets you up for a trend or a habit or a pattern of support. Change your habits through your environment. One thing that's really useful, I'm reading the book Atomic Habits right now, and it makes the case that the biggest factor, or one of the biggest factors in creating positive change in your life, is structuring your environment to facilitate lower friction ways to make change. So, this is one of the most obvious things we can think of is, hey, if you put the healthy food at the front of your fridge and the less healthy food in the back of your fridge, you're more likely to eat the healthy food, right? Like, that's setting up your environment for low friction to create the behavior you want to see really does make an impact. So for example, I'm not saying this is a good or a bad representation or something you should or shouldn't do, but I know a lot of people would prefer to shop at bookshop.org instead of Amazon because they want to support local bookstores. Okay, so bookmark bookshop.org on your browser front and center so that you go there first instead of immediately going to Amazon. Set up your environment in a certain way to create a path toward less friction toward the things you want to happen. Build in a stop at your local farmers market into your travel routines instead of your big box grocery store, if that's something important to you. Set up your house for easy access to recycling receptacles. Maybe we get lazy and we drop stuff in the trash and don't think about it because the recycling bin is across the house. So set your recycling bins in certain places where they're super easy to be accessible, and make sure you promote recycling in your household through setting up your environment in such a way that makes it easy, that facilitates that ease. So lots of ways you can set up your environment to, again, create a lower friction pattern or lower friction path toward actions that make an impact. Also, it's a good idea, I think, to set aside time for research so you can decide on the highest impact activities. Research, for example, something close to me and close to my heart is investing. So, research investments and which funds have the most impact on corporate policies and behaviors. For example, this is something that I focus on very heavily with my clients and personally. There's a lot of trends out there following ESG and socially responsible investing. And in my opinion, lots of lip service and greenwashing where, a lot of fund companies will slap ESG on a mutual fund and pretend like it's making an impact. Now, again, that's a little harsh, I guess. I'm not, necessarily trying to be super negative here, but there are other funds, however, that go deeper, and as opposed to just slapping ESG on there because they've excluded some fossil fuels, they actually have an advocacy component, and your money is pooled together in these funds that then goes toward things like shareholder resolutions and advocacy toward these large companies to encourage them to make positive change in their activities and behaviors. So, with some research, you can identify where your money can make the most impact and where you, as a consumer in the investing world, for example, can make the most impact. Other examples, you can investigate local minority owned and socially conscious businesses and make a list of the ones you want to support. Do the research to actively identify what organizations in your area you want to support, what businesses you want to support. Also, I think it's really important to develop relationships with other individuals and organizations that are making an impact in ways you're not able to. Lift them up, network with them. If you can't make a direct impact in a certain way, find organizations or people in your community that are making an impact in the way that you support, but are doing it better than you or have the tools or the means to do that. Then support them, share their message, lift them up, network with them. Those are ways you can make an impact without a lot of time or money, but well, some time or money sometimes. But again, you can look for other partners who are doing good work that you would like to see done. I think it's important to set your own boundaries. Um, we all can get carried away and be overwhelmed in many areas of life. And this moral perfectionism is one area where many of us can get overwhelmed. So I think it's important to remember that by setting our own boundaries and keeping our own um, mental state or emotional state healthy with these boundaries makes us more productive and helpful to those around us. So I think good boundaries are important when having these conversations and thinking through these ideas. So those are a few things that I think through when I'm thinking about how can I, first of all, feel at peace with my impact and understand how to, in a healthy way, improve my impact in the world. So also on a more specific note, since we've talked about investing a little bit, one thing I try to remember is a reminder that investing in the stock market, which is what most of us do when we're investing for things like 401ks, IRAs, retirement accounts. These are invested in funds which are invested in the stock market. Investing in the stock market is participating in the profits generated by larger companies. So it's important to find your peace when reconciling that. So, for example, a lot of us say, well, I'm going to avoid shopping at Amazon. I'm going to avoid shopping at big box stores. I'm going to do all local and support all local small business, which is very helpful, I think, to many communities. However, that's a little bit in conflict with the idea that I'm also putting my money over here into the stock market, which is made up of these big box companies. Now, I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm saying it's an interesting point to think through. And so, again, I reconcile that personally by pooling my money into funds and investments that uh, put pressure and have an advocacy component on these larger companies to help them become better citizens. I don't think huge companies are inherently bad. I think some of them are. I think some of them are led by people that are not necessarily as socially conscious as we would like them to be. But I think there are also some very good people doing very good work in some of these large companies. And I would rather put my money toward efforts to encourage them and empower them to make social change in the world than to just avoid them altogether and pretend like they feel that or that makes an impact. So, again, this is soapboxing a little bit, but that's kind of one thing that helps me reconcile investing in the market along with making an impact in the world at a local and a global level. So I hope that's helpful in thinking through the concept of moral perfectionism, trying to set boundaries around that, and doing what we can do in our particular spaces in our lives with the effort to increase that over time and continue to look for ways to make a greater impact. There's a quote that I've come across many times from Edward Everett Hale, who's an author. And the quote goes, I am only one, but I am still one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do something that I can do. So it's a nice reminder that, yeah, you're one person, or you're a small group, or I'm only, one person here and I can't change the world by myself. But that doesn't mean I can't do something. It doesn't mean that I'm not making a positive impact in lots of little micro efforts throughout my life. So I would encourage all of us to remember that we are imperfect. Um, Moral perfectionism is impossible and in many ways can be unhealthy. And it's important to do what we can do and to continue forward with continuous improvement. Progress, not perfection, is important. Progress toward making an impact, making the world a better place, supporting those who need help. That's what's important. And as long as we're pointed in the right direction and we're moving forward as a consumer and a participant in the economy, I think that is a great place to start. So, with that, I would love your thoughts as well, particularly in episodes like this, where it goes little bit deeper into non-technical stuff and more conceptual conversations. I'd love to hear your opinions. You can reach out anytime by emailing me at podcast@elevationfinancial.com. And my website is elevationfinancial.com, as you may have guessed. And you can find me there. And if you'd like to reach out and book a complimentary money session, whether you're interested in becoming a client or not, either way, you can book that online. It's super easy. And I'll be happy to chat with you and answer any questions you might have about anything on your mind. All right. With that, thanks so much for joining me today. Appreciate you being a listener. Have a great day. We'll see you next time.